Hello, my name is Des Lally and you're welcome to the 44th Clifden Arts Festival. We're very honoured indeed to welcome the renowned writer and scholar Melatu Uche Okorie in conversation with Joanna Webb. Melatu has a strong interest in the rights of asylum seekers and migrant education in Ireland and is currently studying for a PhD in Education at Trinity College Dublin. So in conversation with Joanna Webb, I'd like to welcome Melatu to Clifden.
Hey.
Good morning, Melatu. Lovely to
Hey. Oh, so
meet
lovely to meet you finally, Joanne.
Yeah. Even if it is virtually, I wish that we were meeting in the lovely town of Clifden and that we were welcoming you to the Arts Festival this year, but still great to meet in this platform as well. How are you this morning?
I'm great. I think the thing about Zoom is that you meet so many people that eventually when you meet them outside, you don't know them, but you've met them and you spend like an hour and 2 hours chatting to them over Zoom. Yeah. But if it was in person and you have met in a room, you definitely know them when you see them outside. But with Zoom, there's this thing that so but hopefully that won't be the case with us. Like we would meet properly.
We will. I've every intention of meeting you in person.
Okay, that's great. Okay, that's great.
Absolutely. So yeah, I was just looking through everything that you've been doing over the last few years. So it's nearly 3 years, I guess, since ThisHostel Life was published. And, I don't know about you, but I'm finding at the moment, so many people are asking me, oh, what are you working at now? And I'm like, I'm just surviving a pandemic. But I was looking at what you've been doing, and you've been doing an extraordinary amount of stuff in the last few years. The Arts Council, and I was looking at your beautiful piece of work for the Irish Arts Centre, sitting in my car. Is that the first time that you've kind of performed your work as such?
Yeah, yes, apart from which had nothing to do with me really, apart from the time when the Irish National Opera, they transcribed ThisHostel Life into an operatic piece. That would be, the first time. Yeah, but this would be the first time that I, as a person, did that kind of work, which was interesting. Yes, and I loved it.
Enjoy it.
Oh, I loved it. I liked the fact that it wasn't just and that was the one with the Botanic Gardens, actually, that was turned into there's a story that for the Botanic Gardens. They were having the brightening air. This was through the Arts Council and all of that, but this is forgetting the name of the group now. But anyway, it was centered around the Botanic Gardens and all of that. And that was another thing that was actually read out loud. It was, another person read the story, and, they didn't enact it, as in the one with the Irish Arts Centre, but someone else read it, which was great to have someone else read your work in that way, do an audio form or whatever it was that was done with it. But yes. Yeah.
Do you see yourself going in that direction? I mean,
I would love to.
Really engaging about your performance. I mean, what I loved about it was there was this kind of intensity with the music, and then such a, the thread of fear was there in your performance, but there was just such a kind of a warmth and a compassion as well that I loved about it. So you're very engaging as a performer.
I don't know. I would love to. I think there's just something about seeing what's or having what's work transcribed or related to from another way. I think reading is such, not everyone does read, but people tend to watch things, short clips or whatever, a longer thing. And yeah, that would be something I would love to. That actually got me into thinking about, the area of arts, performing arts as a whole, and looking at it in terms of having to work with other people, not just myself as a writer, but how can I work with other people? How can other people work with me in that sense, having collaborators and all of that. And I thought that was just, and I say looking at the at the form of theater more closely, like what's going on here, so hopefully more things will come up, come out of it, so yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'm really curious about, I've read a bit about how this hostel life came about and you being encouraged to join a competition, but I'm curious about what preceded that. I mean, when you were doing your degree in Nigeria, did you have thoughts then, or were there any seeds of thoughts about becoming a writer at that point?
Never.
No.
Never. So it didn't even make it into my mind. Like I can't even say it's so out of my, my mind. But it's not even one of the careers that if I were to be woken up, or whatever the case may be, that I would choose as an option, it wouldn't even make it. I don't think it would even make it outside of my wait. It wouldn't even make it into a waiting list. Not to talk about one of the things that I would become. No, never. I was just a reader. I enjoyed reading. I never considered myself. Didn't even think that I should write or want. It's not even a want. No, always just been someone who enjoyed reading. Yeah.
Would it have been something that you would have been allowed to do you think, in your family? Would that have been?
If I had chosen that, I don't think it was about being allowed. It was just that maybe I was just too energetic in some ways to settle down to write. I was never that kind of, I can be two things. I can be an extrovert, I can be an introvert, but I don't think it would have been something that, would have crossed. But I've always been the one that would do, I don't want to use the word intellectual. No, I don't want to use that word. I want to say the questioning one. I've always questioned things. I've always looked at things closely. I've always, argued over things, stuff like that. I've always been that one. I don't want to use the word, I don't want to use the word political, but I've always gone that way. Maybe more, I'll use the word analytical more, I've always been that kind of person. Well, I think, so, but I wouldn't have, no, but writing.
Not even in your sphere of, yeah.
Musician, probably, dancer.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have gone into those lines. Actor, maybe, but writing, no way. Yeah.
So in another life somewhere, you're playing an instrument, or what kind of a musician?
If I knew how to, but I see myself learning and going into that field. Like, I can imagine myself being there, standing with someone playing the guitar and singing, something like that. Yeah, not that I have a voice, but to sing with. But well, I would have stuff like that would have been my cup of tea. A dancer, oh yeah, probably.
I could see what's getting up now for your next performance, a little bit of guitar playing, some dancing, set to some text. Yeah, I'm in if you want any help with that.
Acting, yeah, but none of those other things, yeah. I wasn't interested in, things like that at all.
So it's something about the kind of it's almost like the kind of the oyster, the pearl and the oyster situation with you. I'm imagining then the kind of the confines of the situation you find yourself in direct provision. That
yes, I think it's that moment where there's there's a stillness, a quietness, where you use the right word, confines of the situation. You just find yourself doing these things, and I think so, because when you're always always on the move, maybe not physically, but your mind is constantly moving, doing things. It's hard to put it together, and I just didn't have any. I didn't know any writer around me to look at and say, oh, I want to be like this person as a role model. So that there wasn't any. I would say so. It wasn't just something that I thought of or imagined. In any case, yes, I know people who had all kinds of degrees, but they were doing law or things like that. Or they were, doctors, or were, in any field, but not, what I ended up studying. I ended up studying English, but at the same time, it wasn't because I wanted to be a writer, but just because I enjoyed literature, and so.
Interesting, yeah. It's so important, that piece, isn't it, about who's around you and what you see possible. And you've spoken before about this idea of them and us in Irish society, and how there's still this perception of the other, regardless of how long you're here, or even if you're born here, particularly around race. And certainly in my family, that's what we've experienced. You know, my son will always say, you know, when someone asks him where he's from, he'll say, oh, I'm from Kenya, when he's here. And I say, well, why don't you say you're Irish? And he's like, because Mum, they're not really asking me where I'm from, they're asking me why I'm the color that I am. And
so smart for him. Yeah. That's not accurate though.
When he's in Kenya, he always says he's Irish, you know, because he's and he knows what people are asking him. They're asking him why his skin is.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that in terms of, you know, you've talked about the need to hear more voices and to hear more alternative voices in Ireland. And I'm just wondering, in the last 3 years since you wrote ThisHostel Life, do you feel that has increased? Do you feel like we are hearing more voices? Do you feel like the right conditions are in place for more voices to be heard that aren't the mainstream?
Yes, you see, I would say yes, that there's that intention, but is it visible yet? I do not think so. Yeah. And I think the only reason why it's not that visible is that, you know, I think there's this need to control how the voices should come through, how we should hear what they're hearing, you know, or what they have to say. Do you understand what I mean? So as long as that control is there, I don't think, you know, people have to have the freedom to come up and say the things they want to say the way they want to say it. But if they have that consciousness that if I say something that there's not to the liking of the people who are going to buy my books, or the people who are going to help me promote my book, or, you know, or whatever the case may be, then I'm going to be in trouble. Then there's no point, you know, they would rather not, because they want to see someone who's done it to, you know, they can only, we learn by examples. So we can say, oh, that person is, and then this is what happened to their life. And then if I go that route, then this could be my, you know, this could be the end for me. And so, except, you know, all they have to do is to write stories where they have to thank, excuse me, you know, I'm going to be blunt now, if they have to thank, you know, so many people, oh, thank you so much, my Irish landlord, for the kindness you showed to me. Thank you so much to so-and-so person for being this. Thank you. So, you know, except they're going to write those kind of books where they're thanking, or they're going to, you know, what I say, overemphasize the kindness of A and B. And you when you're reading such stories, you kind of know that, you know, this is, I'm not saying that that's not the case, but when you read stories where people feel a need to overly thank someone or overly mention the kindness of someone, or that means I'm worried that if I don't do this, that person is not going to like me, or that person is not, you know, or whatever the case to me. You kind of know from the stories when you read that it's not. That it's not really expressing the right situation. I'm not saying every situation is the same, but you know, I know where I'm going with this. But then it's, you know, the us and them is very prevalent in Irish society. Everyone knows it. If people don't admit it, then, you know, I don't know what like it's obvious, you know, that has this. I think the society has this way of you know, wanting everyone. We can't all be one person. You know, I refuse to be like everybody else around me. Like it's so repugnant to me to be like everybody else, to act like everybody else, to speak the way everybody else does. And I don't need, you know, somebody else's approval to be me, you know, that. So yes, there is. The gap is there. Is the awesome that, and it's widening more. The shocking part of it is that it's getting wider and wider, you know, as much as people are trying so much on the surface to bring it closer, it's widening. The gap is just getting wider, and I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, there's certainly moments for me in the last few years where I've kind of felt, you know, because so much has happened, I suppose, with the Black Lives Matter movement in particular, and everything that's come out of that. And I totally agree. There seems to be this kind of more of a separation, or more of a gap. And I, you know, I have lots of questions around that. You know, some of it for me feels like it comes from this sense of tokenism, you know, and also this sense that you know, a lot of these requests for stories to be heard are about mining people's trauma, or, you know, Melatu, you can only write you know, this about what's traumatic for you. You can't go and write a fairy story, because that's not what we, you know, we don't want to hear those stories from you because of who you are and the box that you fit in. And it's so that for me, that's so interesting, that kind of idea of, you know, stories that are just about gratitude and not about being critical. You know, and I'm thinking about your this Hostel Life story, and that image at the end of the manager closing down the windows when she asks for honey, and this power over this idea, the humiliation and the power that's there in that act, and how everyone is left in that situation of just, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to read that made me cry, that piece, because I just, yeah, I'm trying to find my question here, and I'm, you know, I've noticed in a lot of the interviews that you've done when you have talked about this, them and us, and a lot of the comments then around, you know, how dare you criticize us, and, you know, you should be just grateful for being here. What do you think that is within Irish psyche, that we're not able to be criticized? What's your sense?
Before I answer that, I just want to tell you a story, and then I'll you know, go into that story. I did something like, I wouldn't call it a Q&A, but I, you know, like I was in this group where I had to talk about ThisHostel Life, and I was just like the interview we're doing now. And someone said that a scene in ThisHostel Life was awkward, like the whole story in ThisHostel Life, the whole ThisHostel Life was awkward for her, you know. And I thought, okay, you know, but then the interesting thing is, if you as a reader, you know, an Irish reader reads it and think this was awkward, like it made me feel awkward, how about the people whose life it was a lived experience? You know, I mean, this is a story told to be funny, in a sense, you know. How about people who had gone through scenes like that, such humiliation, and all? How do you think that made them feel? You know, so it's easy for us to kind of, you know, if I see something or hear something that's not to my liking, or that, you know, I feel a bit, you know, uneasy, it's easy for us to shy away from there. You know, I could see, I can see a situation that might not be comfortable for me to deal with, but rather than, I don't even know what, rather than, you know, help or that situation, I might, you know, you get that a lot. You shy away, and then you say, oh, this was awkward for me. But then what is awkward for you? People died. Like some people committed suicide, you know, around situation. Some people, you know, there are thoughts of, you know, there are situations or times when you would feel so, or something would happen that will make you feel so humiliated that you remember, you know, you don't even want to think about it, or it sours the whole of your day. You know, in that sense, like you're upset the whole day. That could be that situation. But then, you know, I don't think it's there is this, have you ever met someone who feels they are, you know, probably perfect? Have you ever do you have a friend who feels they're perfect, you know? And then, or maybe you might be, you know, you have that
trying to think now, yeah. Maybe some ex-boyfriends, probably.
Yeah, and then you try to criticize them. You know, you try to tell them, oh, I didn't like the way you handled it. But, you know, because they're used to hearing how perfect they are, you know, so many people have told them they're perfect. So many people have told them they do this right, they do that right, they're this and they're that. So it's hard to hear that other voice of criticism, you know, that other voice. And it's not just in the situation of direct provision or anything like that. I think when it comes to things like, I'm reading up on, you know, the Magdalene laundry, you know, probably the setup of the at the moment, I'm looking at, you know, something around the Christian Brothers and all that. So I'm just going to write reports and all that. So I'm just going to use that as an example at this case. So you find out that people don't like hearing things that are, you know, there's this thing that where we shut down a situation or a structure, but then you're not talking to individuals, you're talking to, you know, like group of people, you're talking to structures, and there's this shutdown, like they don't want to hear, they don't want to be criticized. But then it's all about the power, who is making the demand for change. That's always the problem. When it's someone that we feel we have power over that is making the demand for change, then we feel awkward, then we're rude and unruly and say, who do you think you are? But when it's someone that we feel is above making the demand for change, then everything changes. I mean, look at, we're here in COVID-19. Who would have thought that the government could shut down everything for, that everything, like you can work from home, literally, that the streets can be empty. But then it's who is asking them to do that. So when there's this thing, we don't know what to do about direct provision, we don't know what to do. I don't believe that, because they've proven that they know what to do, actually. That houses can be created, things can be made to happen, changes can be made. So we can't keep telling ourselves, when Black Lives Matter happen, and then you say, people are talking about social media and social media as a tool that people kind of voice out hate and all of that, and then Twitter and Facebook and all of them say, oh, we don't know what, there's nothing we can do, we can't control that, and yet they can control people saying things that are carrying what was it called, what's the word now, conspiracy theories. They can actually shut them down before they can shut down your YouTube account, they can close Facebook accounts, they can actually do all those things, but then they claim they couldn't do it for so long, and yet we have this 18 months that has happened. So it does that's changed the rhetoric for me, that's changed the story for me. So I'm thinking, okay, we can actually do something. It's just that we don't want to do those things. It favors somehow there's someone there. There are people there that all of these things favor. So, and that's the truth. And as long as it's favoring certain people, the people with the money, the people with that sponsor the politics and all of that, the kingmakers. I mean, we can cry and talk for as long as we wish. Nothing's going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, regardless of whether we want to see that or not, it is people in power who are profiting from direct provision, and we know that, and also that cognitive dissonance, I think, among the general Irish population, where they're just kind of going, this thing doesn't exist, and for me as well, there's something which is about, it's so like the Magdalene laundries, like the mother and baby homes. There's such a blind spot in terms of our own idea of our national identity, which is about welcome and kindness and openness, that is really threatened by people like you saying this is not the reality of those that come here. And I think even people that have come here that haven't been through the direct provision system are not finding the Céad Míle Fáilte that we advertise. And I think that's really challenging to us, to really actually, to take out the streets in the bright light and actually go, well, what's the reality of other people's experience coming here? And I've heard that from a number of people, that it's like everyone's so friendly initially, but then it stops, it just reaches a certain point. You don't get invited into people's homes. You're not, you're not brought into their inner circle. And I mean, I have to say, I found that incredibly challenging when I started to hear those stories first. And when I experienced personally the going through the visa application system for my son's dad, which we tried to go through a number of years ago. And after 7 years of trying.
My God.
Yeah. So, to experience that as an Irish citizen, having born here, and to kind of feel that sense of powerlessness that's there as well, when you talk about, that sort of, that need to say thank you to everybody. I found myself in situations regularly where I felt like I couldn't speak in case we said the wrong thing, and they went, oh, well,
she's blocked.
Incredibly
disheartening.
Yeah. It's just, and it really, that lack of humanity is so incongruent with, and for me, there's two sides of it, and I'd be curious about what you think. There's that piece about, like I said, the Céad Míle Fáilte and our sense of ourselves and our national identity, which we're so attached to. And the other piece of it being us as traditionally as victims, as the underdog, as the oppressed, and then not being able to see ourselves being in the role of the oppressor. Yeah, I'm curious if that resonates with you, and particularly with your experience since you've left direct provision, and how, you know.
Oh my God, it's creepy.
Too big a question, maybe.
it's there, really. It's the funniest thing is that somehow I just felt myself slipping into the part of the outsider, in a sense. It wasn't something that I saw, I knew, like I got the sense at the beginning. I think I was just like, is this happening? Is this happening? Is this? Oh, actually, it is happening, and it's right there. You've been kind of like pushed out or something. Yeah, now but then, funny enough, I relish it, because now I don't, like, if you ask me as someone, like, what do I do in this situation? I'll say, enjoy it, because it frees you up. It frees you up. The only thing that I would say is because one thing I've noticed is there is, in every country, in every world, there's an abuse of power everywhere, and sometimes you wonder why. It comes, in some cases it's not even necessary. I don't know what the thing is about not giving would I say information, or someone would know something or how to move something up, but they just it's that stubbornness of, I'm not going to do it, or or just targeting someone and saying, I'm going to make this person's life this way, and it's fun. I find out it within. I don't know if I noticed that, because Nigeria is a funny country. It's a country that that the money buys and bullshit talks. If you have money, everything is working. So it's a different thing too. So sometimes when you don't get a certain service, it's just your money that hasn't gotten it, not because someone somewhere is sitting down and not doing it. It's just because you don't have the money to get that service. So that's a different. Would I say a different bull, or a different animal to tame altogether. But here you find that everything is in place. So it's just one person deciding, ruling over this, ruling over a department, deciding who says what. Could hear your name on the phone and decide, and you can just imagine them, because you probably got someone who was pleasant initially, and then they say, oh, hold on a second, and then they ask someone else's opinion, and then they come back with a different attitude, and that. So you can just you imagine all of these things, or you see them around. So I don't know what the problem. I just think that it's power corruption. There's a problem of power corruption here, and it's every, any power, wherever they are, in any situation they are, whether even in your local supermarket, wherever it is, power there's just this, power corruption going on. They get drunk with the little power that they have, and and there's no accountability. There's no, I think there's this thing with, just like in the scene, in the honey scene in ThisHostel Life, where the manager comes in, rather than trying to resolve the situation, she kind of sides with one person and shuts down the place. And so you find that going on. So what has the staff learned, in that situation? So that means there's always going to be the outsiders, the ones who are going to be powerless, and the ones who are going to be sheltered for their behavior, So you find out that the oppressor wins and the victim is victimized all the time. It's rotational, it's happening all the time, constantly. I don't know what the solution is, because I think that there's a fear in Ireland. I feel it, I sense it. I don't know what, I don't know if any other person has it, but there's just this kind of fear that, that you sense, that, like everyone has to conform, or else, on the outside, or else this happens. So you have to. So when the Queen Bee, if it's a school, whatever, let's say people that have kids in primary school, if there's a Queen Bee that decides that this child is not going to be invited, every other person runs to do the same thing, or else they're out. that parent is out. So you see, there's always that. So I get a sense of it, that there's always this fear, and I don't know where it's coming from. And Ireland is such, and you look at it, this is 2021. Why are we controlled by some sense of fear? I sense it. I don't know where it's coming from, but and I don't know what the solution is. So people find any reason at all to join that group, as opposed to do what they feel instinctively that they're right. So you find that people keep losing their voices all the time. But then, as the word, there's a phrase in the Bible that says, "What is the use of a salt if it loses its flavor?" So what are we out here? What's the point of us being alive and humans and who we are? You being Joanna, maybe, if we lose our voice, if we can't speak freely, if we can't do, when there's always that fear that, I could be out, and I think.
Yeah, and I think that for me was, the three stories in ThisHostel Life are so different. Like, in a way, when you read them, it's almost like it could be three different writers, and this, the one that's in the hostel, and then the one that's out in the community, and the one that's out back in Nigeria. They're so different. But for me, those two themes of fear and belonging were what was really common in them. And yeah, it's so interesting that fear. I really hear and agree with what you're saying around that. And sometimes I wonder, is that still a hangover from a long history of colonization? So at the end of the day, it's still only 100 years, since we got our independence, and then were we colonized by the church after them? I mean, that's really the question for me. But I'm really wondering, how do we move forward? At the end of the day, Ireland now is not Ireland that it looked like 50 years ago. So much has changed, so much has opened up, and yet still we continue to hold on to such a narrow idea of Irishness and equity and equality, not just around race, but around how we treat our own Indigenous traveller population, how we treat anyone who's not on a lower socioeconomic background. All of these things are still huge issues, and I'd be really curious to hear what you think needs to change, or how can we change and move forward in a way. Because, like, what I find so interesting, I think I'd said to you, I've been to Lagos many times, and I lived in Kenya as well. And what strikes me is that there's so much similarity in Irish culture. I mean, we're much more repressed in terms of a movement and things. I think that's a lot to do with the sun. But anyway, that's my own theory. But there's so much that's common in terms of our way of dealing with family. Religion is very important, and there's so much that could bring us together, and yet we seem to continue to not embrace anyone that comes in. And I'm, particularly as mothers, I'm curious about, how do we move forward together, and what do we need to do to really start to change the way things are, and to kind of stem this tide of moving away from each other rather than moving forward together as Irish people.
Sometimes I pick up books by, written by an Irish person. I'm reading Emily Pine. I know I'm a few years late. I'm reading her now, Notes to Self. And it's just such an incredible book. And the things, I'm admiring her guts in writing. I pick up such books, I'm like, oh my God. Even when I read Asking for It, which is Louise O'Neill, I'm thinking, geez, who wrote this, so when I read books like that, I want to meet the people who wrote them. I'm like, what an audacious person! I don't even think I'll be able to do this. And but then I go outside, and the people I see around me are not like the people that write those books. That I'm like, where is the guts of this person who wrote this book? Where is that? Where is the? You just kind of get a sense that just like I said, it's just that I think in Ireland, I don't have a solution. But one thing I know is that people don't talk to each other. There's no talking and talking and talking and talking until everything inside you is out. You know, I don't know how to put it. If I'm sitting with a group of African women, there's a kind of talk we tend to go into instantly. You know, there's talk that sometimes is just, well, sometimes you hear their stories. You know, sometimes someone could just engage you in tell you a story that's like, geez, you've been in, yeah, sister, it happened to me. I'm telling you, you know, you kind of get that, like, oh, you know, they're not putting it in a book. They're not afraid to say it. They're not afraid to say, you know, this happened or that happened. But I feel that sometimes in Ireland that there's almost like you know, there's a need to be perfect or to be a certain way or to, you know, it's there in Africa. I'm not saying that it's not there, but sometimes you just like there's this kind of side. There's something about hiding what's happening so the world does not hear it or does not know it. You know, like even when you're watching, I tuned off for watching interviews on television, on RT and all that, because you know sometimes even the way they ask the questions, I'm like, you know, like just go into it, talk. You know what I mean? Like give it. So it's just like we have to make it nice and make it nice and make it nice. I'm like, that's not right. Let them talk, and you can talk about talk. You know, connect. You know, so there's this desperation, like if we don't make it this way, people are going to judge us. And it's not, and I understand, because if they say it a certain way, they're going to be judged. So it's just that fear of judgment that worries me. You know, I listen to, if I put an interview done by, let me say, done in Nigeria now, and an interview done in Ireland, probably RT, you just see the difference. It's just the way they speak. It's just the communication. It's just the telling of the story, like telling it the way it is. Like I don't know, you know, that kind of like, that will get you and hold you. It's not that way. And I just wish that, but then I see that in books, but in the conversations, I don't get that, you know. And there's another thing where, and I think that judgment is in, you know, like sometimes people are describing another person. I'm saying, you know, you can't describe somebody one way. We're so many things. You know, you, Joanne, you're different with me. You're different with Noah. You're different with, you know, this person. You're different with that person. You can't, everybody, we're not just, you know, the environment changes us. So I don't know how I can make a judgment of you without knowing all of you. And even if I know all of you, I'll still be learning all of you tomorrow. So I can't just say Joanne is like this, when tomorrow Joanne can be somebody else. You can wake up and something you made a decision yesterday, you make a different decision about it tomorrow. You can think, oh, I'm going to do this today, and then you think something else. So for me to take a piece of you and call that you and say, this is Joanne, that's silly. You know, but I find that going on in Ireland, where they take a piece of someone and they paint that. You know, there's this thing about wanting to make someone, you know, if we don't like somebody, criminalize them, judge them, you know, whatever. So we only like the person, we only want to like the story of a person that we like, but we don't want to like the story or the life or whatever. We'll find a way of condemning the story or the life of somebody else that we don't like. So, you know, there's always this thing, this tendency, I can go on and on and on and on. But the thing is, to answer your question, is talk. People don't talk. I don't know, you might have hit something. It might be the sun. Sometimes, you know, like even, you know, sometimes you just need that, you know, there's maybe the heat as a way of making people's blood boil and they get angry. Maybe that anger is what they need, you know, like in a way, in a good way, not in a harassing way, not in an assault way, you know, not in hurting people, but just talking. People need to talk. People don't, I don't think people talk, and that they talk, you know, properly, like they talk deeply. You know, there might be one or two people that you tell something, but even conversations or situations that I've heard people talking to relatives, I don't even think they tell them. things. I don't, like, I'm older now, so, and I have, like, I feel my parents are old now, so there's certain things I can't tell them because I feel they're not well enough to know those things. I try to manage and like think, but then, you know, when I was younger, like, there's nothing we can't talk about. There's nothing I don't talk about with my child. Like, I want her to talk to me. I want to know everything. I want us to argue about everything and scream and shout. Like, I want her to know that this is somebody that she can talk to, and that's how we should be. Like, I want us to talk. To some people, it might be we're talking too much, but for me, I want that. You know, life is about, you know, life is full of talk. Some of them are crazy. Some of them are, you know, are not worth anything. But then, you know, we need to talk. Because the other out of, if you don't talk, you have these pent up emotions, and the way it releases is not always the nicest way, you know. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes out in a dangerous or difficult way then, or so. What is that? What is the lack of talking?
Do you think you talk? Do you think, you know, like?
I think I can hear. I mean, I know what you're saying. I think that there is a lot of feeling like you have to fit in the box, you have to be a certain way, and you have to be proper, and you have to be. And I'm wondering, you know, again, where the roots of that is, you know, or like, is there, you know, if there's shame there, or if there's this idea of like, I have to present myself in a certain way, otherwise, again, I'll be cast out, or I'll be, you know, I won't belong. And you know, it's for me, there's just such value in kind of someone who's come in here, being able to identify those things and being able to look at them and say, this is what I see, this is what I observe. And I feel like this is something that needs to be seen and worked on. And again, it comes back to me for that piece of us, and I say us collectively, you know, not being able to really take on that criticism in the way that it's meant, and just to hear it as being, oh, well, you don't like Ireland, or you're just saying we're all bad, or that kind of thing. And there's something for me about, you know, how difficult it is to take that stuff in, but if we can, you know, what it can open up in us. Because, you know, there's a reason why we have such huge mental health issues, such high suicide rates, such high levels of alcoholism in this country. And I do think it is that inability, whether it's culturally, you know, I'm not sure where it comes from, but that non-expressing of what's actually happening inside, and your deepest emotions and your hurts and your fears, which does lead to all that. So I definitely think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. How we address that, I mean, I do think we're starting to talk more as a society, but I feel like, and again, I work a lot in this area of inclusion, and, you know, I was talking to you about Rooted in Africa and Ireland, the organisation that I'm part of, that I run the women's section of, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to provide spaces where women can come together and talk really honestly, and talk in a way where they feel heard and not judged. And I think that's what's really missing. I think it's really what's missing for people to be able to say, I hate it, but I'm afraid of you because you look different and I've never met anyone like you. And, you know, you move differently and you're loud, and I'm scared I'm going to say the wrong thing. And am I even allowed to say that you're Black? Or, you know, all of these things that come out when people actually feel that sense of a space to be able to say what they want. And I think that's a big issue now, that people are so terrified of saying the wrong thing and messing up, that they pull back and they withdraw and they don't speak. And I think that that's possibly part of that wider picture that you're saying as well. The people are so terrified of saying the wrong thing to someone that they perceive as being different, that they might be judged, or they might be attacked, or they might be seen as being stupid or ignorant. You know, I think there's so many of those layers that are there that stop us having conversations.
I agree, Joanne, but you see, it's okay. You like, let me just give you let me touch on this now before you go on to something else, because I know that that's a real fear, and I do understand that. But then it's okay. It's for me to. It's okay for for you to live here now and say, oh, I don't even know why Melatu said this. And it's okay for me to say, do you know what? I don't even know why Joanne asked me that. It's a normal human, like you would do that with your friends, wouldn't you? Like you can have a conversation with your friend and say, did you hear how she asked me this? And then, you know, your friends say, oh, I saw how she, you know, it's normal. You know, this means that that's normal for human beings to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. So even if I said, or you said, or I thought, and you, oh, it's fine. The thing is that we got that out and then we can move on, you know. So, I mean, sometimes we take things that are normal and make it so much bigger and, you know, so much, you know, would I say horrible than it necessarily is, you know. And do you know where it comes from? Do you know what makes it, what turns it from what is normal to something else? Because there's a lot of reliance on gossip and slander and all of those kind of things and history. So when things like, if I say, oh, if you, okay, let me turn it up. If I said, oh, this person is such an idiot, you know, and someone heard it and goes, did you hear what she said? She caught her, she was talking and she went, she's an idiot. The repeated thing is always bigger than the actual thing. It hurts more than the actual thing. So, you know, and then the other person goes on, you know, and there's this hate that starts growing and, you know, anger grows from there. But if people have conversations, if people, you can't say the wrong, it's fine to say the wrong thing. I say the wrong thing all the time. Yeah, I'm actually saying the wrong thing, but, you know, like, who cares? Do you understand? It's better than for me to be silent and have it all in here, you know? So it's why I'm sure I've said so many things that are wrong here. But then it's okay. I'm not going to leave here feeling, you know, so, you know, hard, you know, horrible and, you know, whatever. I'm the same with you. Like, I wouldn't want you to be that way. Like, I would like us to have a conversation and just, it's normal. It's actually, it's not, like, it's not, it's the other side of it is what's not normal. To not do to not make mistakes, that's abnormal, you know. But to say the wrong thing and say the wrong thing all the time, that's normal, you know. That should actually make you laugh, you know. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to set off this anger or set off, like, just because someone said the wrong thing, it's not going to make me to join a far right group. Like, that's ridiculous, you know. That's a word, you know. That's just one person speaking. It has nothing to do with my life. It doesn't affect my life in any way, shape, or form, you know. So, yeah. Sorry, so go on. I just wanted to.
No, I didn't have a question there. I'm really I had a huge big list of questions, but of course I haven't asked you any of them because it's so much more interesting just to talk and just connect. I feel like I need to ask you more about your writing though, and like I said at the beginning, I hate that question at the moment. Oh, what are you doing at the moment? What are you doing next? But I'm curious if there is anything coming up for you.
There's nothing worth telling people in the Clifden Arts Festival, you know, that will listen to this interview. So, you know, like, yeah, there's nothing worth telling them in that angle, really. I'm sure they probably, when there's something out, you would be, you know, you'll be the first to know.
I think you're probably being very modest.
Yeah, you know, like, I'll make you guys one of the first people to know that, yeah.
So tell me a bit then about your appointment to the Arts Council and what that means for you.
Oh, it's great. I love it. It's something I do not take lightly at all. It's kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I see the almost like within the arts sector, I see that there's so much work to try to make it more diverse. You know, if I wasn't there, I probably would be saying there's nothing being done. But then because I'm there at the table, I see that there's a lot of work, or, you know. But then you're sitting in one place. I don't really work directly with the people. So, you know, the disconnect is what I cannot say, you know, or where the people are or how the information gets out to people. That I don't have any, you know, any kind of oversee over. But from where from being on the Arts Council, I can say that there's this, you know, there's a need, and there's an intention there to you know, to diversify arts. And there's so much work being done, you know, like an artist, not just, you know, around diversity of arts and everything, but then it's all about even paying the artists, because I know when I started and how, you know, things were then, like a lot of things will be like, oh, could you help us to, could you read a story? You know, we will put your name on our website and stuff like that. And then, you know, you as artists, you're not getting paid anything. But now it's different. Like that's, you know, you're actually getting paid to do a certain job, because you can't ask a carer, could you go and look at a patient, you know, and just go home? You know, even if they cancel the shift, you're going to pay them. You know, and that's how it is, you know, that's how it is for artists. So I like seeing that change in terms of, you know, recognizing that, you know, whatever people do as in terms of the art, as an artist or whatever it is, with displaying their work, whatever, is something that needs to be recognized as a kind of work, and, you know, and for it to be paid for. So that was great. And there's just little things that making, you know, art great again. There's just so much policies and all that are changing, and, you know, and I love just being part of it and just watching the changes. And I know that I know that there's so much great things coming up soon that, you know, will be, yeah.
That's great. That's really great to hear that that's actually happening in motion. Particularly around the pay as well. That's brilliant, because so much of that culture of would you mind just doing this, and it'll be great for your project, and all of that.
That was, I know that when I said that, it was that that was the thing, you know, and you just thought, oh yeah, you know, I'm just you know, they're just showcasing my work and all of that. But then it gets to that point where now people know that, you know, they have to be paid, because in every other field or endeavor, you know, people would be paid for their time, you know, even when it's a cancelled shift, you pay for it, you know, I mean, so that should be the case for.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, my response now when someone asks about doing something for free or exposure, I'm like, well, you know, I did try that in Aldi, you know, paying for my shopping by saying, I'll walk around with your bags. And weirdly, they said no. So that's my answer now when someone asks me to do something for exposure or for free. So yeah, you mentioned earlier about not necessarily being political, but being kind of argumentative. Well, I think that those would be your words. I'm probably misquoting you, but
no, I'm just like
I'll have to go back going, this is what she said. This is where misunderstanding happens. Did you feel like when you were publishing ThisHostel Life that was an active campaigning, or that was a political movement? Or did you have any sense of that?
I think with the stories in this hostel, I think with some of my stories, definitely with us, every story I'm trying to you know, tell something there or to point out something, you know, I wouldn't deny that, you know, there's political, no, but to tell, you know, I think the aim of telling a story is to highlight something at the end of the day. Every story you're telling, even if it's just about something that happened in the pub, it's about an event that you're trying to, you know, to highlight. So I guess, with this also, like that with every story, there's always that, in a sense. Not necessarily political, because, you know, I think even just listening to things that when I was even in direct production, I didn't even want to know who was in Taoiseach, like I was that disinterested, you know. But now I do read a little bit about, you know, I try to keep track of certain things that are happening, just because there's a discussion point. So if someone mentions a name, at least I can go, oh, I have an idea of who you're talking about. Yeah. But initially, that would not be my my cup of tea, you know, years back. But yeah, definitely every story there's an aim to highlight something, to point out something, to, you know, to show something, you know. So,
you mentioned that you find it much easier to share in your writing than you do in speaking, or, you know, and has that changed, do you think, since you've
no, I don't think so, because I'm not quite talk. I know Ireland has turned me into a talker, believe it or not. Like I wouldn't have been the one who talks about. If I'm in a group, I'm usually not the one who talks. I enjoy listening. I just enjoy listening and laughing at people's stories. So, but doing all these interviews, you tend to But then I prefer to write the stories as opposed to kind of telling. It's interesting that way, in a sense. It's interesting that way, but it's not necessary because I'm writing my story, in a sense, because that's what I say. I said noticing that people actually thought the stories were my story, in a sense, and that wasn't the case. And I think it was just that line in my author's notes, and I just have to keep correcting that's not, when I mean share, I don't mean like sharing my life story, because there's so many things in the story that there's no. It's not me. Even if I set out, like I've read stories of people who set out to write their stories, and they realize maybe it's a story of a child from when they were in their childhood. They realize that I can't put all these things. Well, I did read one. I can't put all these things in terms of that this happened to one child. People are not going to believe that this happened to one child. So they have this way of bringing in characters into the story and having some events that happen in the child's life happen to those characters. Now, that's not your story anymore. It could be, that it started off as your story, but then you've made it in such a way that it's no longer your story. Am I making sense in any way? Yeah. So what I'm saying, it's difficult to write one story. And that would not be, I admire people who do it. Like I'm like, wow, I'm just kind of like, I'm proud of people who are able to write their stories and share it and write it in such a way that is just, beautifully done. And, like it's taken about, it's not something that I do or I'm able to do, because I think that my life, I'm still living it. Yeah. And I think you can only do something when you can reflect on a situation. If the door is closed in that situation, you can look back and then write about it, But then when certain situations in my life are still continuous, are still kind of rolling over. So until that's done, I'll probably do something like that. I'll probably, like write if people, I don't think anyone is going to find my story interesting anyway, so... adapt it.
I think maybe the audiences would disagree.
No. That's my best story.
When you're writing, are you thinking about how it'll be read? Are you thinking about your audience? Because like when I don't write much, but I think because my background is as an actor, I'm always hearing it in the voice of the person that's reading it. And wondering, does that influence your writing at all, or are you even thinking about who's reading it or how they'll read it?
At the time I did ThisHostel Life, I wasn't. But then after ThisHostel Life and seeing the reaction to some of the stories, I started thinking about the audience. But I find that doesn't make me write well, So I'm just gonna, I've made up my mind, in anything to push that out of the way completely. If it's going to, if probably a million people are not going to talk to me, the whole world, but it's fine. Like it messes up with the story in my head when I'm thinking, how are they going to receive it? I better not put this word in. But then, once you get it into your head, it's hard to take it away. It takes practice. But I hope I'll get to that point where, because not only am I worried about, now I probably will not, okay. Not only am I worried about how they're going to receive, I'm thinking, if I put it this way, are they going to think it's me? If I put a 40-year-old child, are they going to think it's my daughter? If I put this person is, are they going to? So I'm conscious of all of that. And that kind of has, if I put this name, are they going to think it's my sister's name? So things like that kind of come to me now, because I see that that's what people are always looking for, to link something to you, a way of tying something, but that's not, I find that, how can I read a book? I'm reading this note to self, I'm admiring the beautiful writing, you know, the way she, you know, just the sentences, the way, you know, the full stops. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll get a chance to speak to her in a few days anyway. And one of the things, oh God, I shouldn't be doing this, but one of the things that I realize is that, you know, I'm just looking at the sentences, you know, the writing and all of that. And it struck me, you know, I'm still at the beginning part of it, I'll get into the middle of it, that how can someone read a story and not just enjoy, of all the things you enjoy in a story, is to start connecting it to the person, the writer, you know? But that's just, there's just so much to enjoy in a story, just even the writing, even the sentence structure, you know, like there's just so much to enjoy, even the life story that, you know, the story they're giving to you, like the events in the story should be enjoyed outside of trying to draw comparisons or to, you know, to start tying those links and all. I was thinking about it when I was thinking about reading her book, you know, in connection to my book. Like, how can people read and just be tying those, you know? And some, I read about these things where people be trying to pinpoint, you know, parts of the author in the book. Is she talking about this place now? Is she talking about, is this herself, or saying, oh, this is about her and all that? That shouldn't be things that you should be enjoying in the story. You know, there's so much to enjoy. You know, just even the story itself is enough without going into all of that. You know, whether it's about the writer, whether it's not, it shouldn't affect the story in a sense. It should just be left on its own.
Do you think it's something about the context of your book and the fact that it is framed in a certain way, you know, as being the experience of someone in direct provision, that they keep, you know, that the reader then wants to make it all about you, that it must be about you?
Yeah.
Possibly being put more of in a box, you know, than being allowed for it to be.
Yeah, well, we could say that, but at the same time, it's only one story that's set in a direct provision, you know, hostel, one, and two, it's you know, many authors I've read about, you know, writers who were, you know, medical practitioners, and then they dropped out, and then they write, you know, stories around the hospital and all of that. I can't read those kind of and say, oh, because they were doctors themselves or they were coroners themselves, you know, that means that every case, every corpse, it was handled by them. You know, I don't make that link in my head. I just read what they write. I'm not gonna box them into that. I know that, you know, there is some kind of knowledge that they have, you know, I'm talking about that, you know, that they have going into that that field, that you know, that field. But then I'm not going, every time I read the work, that's not what I'm going to be tying into my head. Like, oh, you know, it could be him that treated that case, or what was this? So I don't even think about that. I just read what they write and I enjoy it for what it is and put it there. You know, so I think that's the way, you know. But to tie it there, I think, you know, sometimes when that link is, I do understand why links would be made, but I think when we get stuck into that, and, you know, it takes away from the story itself, you know, and starts making it into something else. That, you know, I read what I did, something, I had a conversation the other day where I wrote a story that's not published, and it was about how, you know, it's about soliciting for young girls in a direct provision hostel. So when you make that story about me, then the point of the story is lost. You know, or when I'm writing about probably deportation, and you're making it, you know, and there are scenes about in there, you know, the story I'm referring to now, you know, and when you start focusing on some other things and leave the main point, which is the deportation. I'm not saying that people will not pick up anything from the story, but then sometimes, you know, making it about the person, or making it, or trying to figure out who they're writing about, and all, it takes away from the story. I mean, it's to me, it's silly, you know, and you don't even want such people to read your work in the first place. Like, I mean, just read and enjoy what is there, or think about the bigger picture, you know, the whole point about the deportation, or the whole point that, you know, young girls are being solicited, you know, think about something and not just worry about, you know, whether it's talking about this person or that person, or if it's about, mainly if it's about the author or whatever the case may be, because it's not always it's not a nice thing to do that still.
Well, maybe because at one point you talk about writing romantic fiction, and that was your one and only time doing that. Maybe that's what you need to do. Go back to the romantic fiction, and then
I know. I
stories about your love life.
I know. I should. That's the case today.
It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you this morning, Melatu, and I can't wait to see what you do next between operas and your appointment to the Arts Council. I'm sure there's going to be some amazing things coming up, and yeah, I look forward to seeing your guitar playing, dancing.
Oh my God! Yeah, I have to join. Like, what is there a kind of like a music city or town in Ireland, like a town or that is known for
Clifden?
Yeah. Oh, really? Then I'm moving to Clifden then.
Absolutely. In fact, I think you should move for the festival. I think that's exactly the right term to call it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's going to be 8 days of absolute crack and the most incredible music and dance and theatre and everything that you will ever see. I'm not in any way biased. It's the best festival in the world.
Will you say that musicians are the happiest people in the world?
Absolutely, they definitely are.
All right, I'll take your word for it then.
There you go. Everyone's heard it here in Clifden. Melatu becoming a musician, dancer. So.
Oh God, probably not a musician, but probably just dance. I'll find some instrument to play along.
Love it.
Thank you so much. And we'd like to encourage all our audiences and participants to go out to your local bookshop and purchase these books and also to support your local bookshops. And we're so fortunate in Clifden to have the Clifden Bookshop, which is a beacon for literature and the arts in Connemara.